whoever and wherever you are.
You're listening to We Hate Small Talk
With Cindy
and Emin. Welcome to We Hate Small Talk. I cannot believe that we are finally doing this. It has been a long time coming, at least in our heads anyway, but we finally took the plunge. We bought our mics last month, and we talked about starting this podcast ever since, last year. So I'm really excited to be here with you, Cindy, and finally be filming this.
Yeah, no, I'm super ecstatic to be here as well. Honestly, I think we've been slowly building up to actually taking this podcast and making it a reality. So yeah, I'm just super happy to be here with you as well, and as well to, welcome our listeners to the podcast.
Yeah, so Cindy, do you want to introduce yourself, since these people probably have no idea who we both are? Or maybe they do because they're our friends who are listening.
Yeah, and we forced you to listen to this. Of course. So my name is Cindy. I'm one of your hosts for the podcast. I'm 22 years old, but, sometimes going on 42 because I wake up feeling middle-aged. But I am Chinese Canadian. I'm based in the 6th Toronto, and I'm actually in my last year of Zoom University, a true struggling senior during this pandemic. But maybe a couple of things about me. I love documentaries, but specifically true crime and things about serial killers is my shit. I love watching things like that, even though I scare myself. And also I just love skincare and makeup and things like that in general as well. You can always find me binging the latest K-drama. So that's what I usually spend my time doing. How about you, Eamon? Introduce yourself too.
Okay, Cindy, I have not heard someone refer to Toronto as the 6 since 2017. So thank you for bringing that back and haunting us all. But my name is Eamon. I am also 22, based in Toronto, and also Chinese Canadian. Cindy and I actually met at Western University, and that's how we know each other. But we'll get into that a little later on in the episode. About me, I am a full-time working woman. I spend most of my days at work, as sad as that sounds. So I don't have as much free time as I'd like to have. But when I do have free time, I like to spend it listening to podcasts. My two favorite are The Daily by the New York Times and Call Her Daddy. Shout out to my fellow daddy gang. And my guilty pleasures would probably be trashy reality TV shows. So think the likes of Selling Sunset and 1,000 Pound Sisters. If you've watched them, you'll know what I mean. And I think some of my other interests, as random as they sound, I really like real estate and interior design. For fun, I'll go on condos.com and just look at listings. I don't know if anyone else does this. Maybe I'm just weird, but I truly enjoy looking at how people design their homes and put them out onto the market. And that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so we've established that Yimin and I are both middle-aged soccer moms. But this is us now. So how did we really meet in the beginning? And I think Yimin mentioned that we met in university. Once again, shout out UWO Mustangs. But yeah, I can kind of set the tone for our story, but it was basically 2016, our first year at university, and it was the first day of class for this introduction to French class that we both took. And I just want to thank our professor for really bringing us together, but really not improving our French at all, at least for me.
I will say, Cindy, that your French is much better than mine, especially your accent. So I don't know what that says about me, but yeah, your French was really good going to that class.
Yeah, well, thank you. But yeah, Eamon, oh God, I did.
That compliment just really threw you off guard. You are lost for
Yeah,
words.
I guess another thing about me is like I cannot take a compliment. Like I just like shrivel and die. But yeah, to get back to the story, I have a first impression of Yimin, which is the fact that she walked in and on the first day of class, she sat down exactly in the front and center of the classroom. And I just remember thinking, wow, this chick is such a gross keener, and I don't think I'll ever be able to be friends with someone like this.
Okay, let me defend myself by saying that I remember I was running incredibly late for that class, like I was for every single class in that first week. And I think I was one of the last people to actually get to class, and all the seats were filled. And I remember seeing you and your friend sitting at the very back of the classroom. And I remember like we were probably the only Asians in that class. So I thought to myself, like, oh, maybe I could be friends with them. But I made a mental note to like get to that later just because you guys already seemed like you guys were pretty close friends and obviously signed up for this class together. So I was this loner who had like nowhere else to sit and no one was saving a spot for me. So I literally just sat at the only empty seat that I could find. So I would like to say that I'm actually not a keener when it comes to school. Honestly, probably a bad thing, but yes, would like to clarify.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember that day as well. Like instead of running late like Heemin, and as someone who's been friends with her for years, I can attest to the fact that she was perpetually running late to things. But yeah, I remember actually taking the bus that day, I think. And like instead of walking the 2 minutes it would have taken me to get to class, I chose to wait for the bus and take it for one stop. So that just goes to show what my personality is like. But yeah, Yuman, what was your first impression of me?
What a great question. So I think my first impression came a bit later on. I feel like I start to form my first impression after I meet them, like for a couple instances, and then I'll actually like start to form an impression of them. So for you, I remember you had invited me to a res party that you were having at your suite, and I came with my roommate, and it was probably like a Friday night, and I just remember at the time, to set the context, Cindy had purple hair and she was pretty crazy compared to some of the other friends that I had. And she just like came up to us like super fun, super outgoing. And she like offered me a sip of her jungle juice. And I was like, wow, like we're 17 or 18. Like she has access to alcohol. That's so cool. And then, yeah, I just remember you were like the life of the party and I thought you were super outgoing.
Yeah, keynote like thought, because like Eamon said, I did have purple hair, you know, I do miss her, but I also like really dressed up like a thought and really took that, you know, freshman mentality front and center. And I genuinely think back and I cannot imagine being that grossly extroverted, because I think Eamon will attest to the fact that I literally have such a low social battery these days. And like, I cannot stand social situations anymore.
I feel like though when you're drunk, you become a different person. Or like even when you're about to get drunk, like at the pre, like you definitely are more outgoing than you are when you're like sober and all of that. So I feel like we have different personalities when it comes to that. Because for me, like I've been told that when I'm drunk, like people can't tell that I'm drunk. Like I just act normal.
Oh yeah, you know, maybe more on that in a different episode.
Yeah, that's actually that's a good episode idea. So let us know if you want to hear that.
Oh yeah, so you know, aside from partying, I think one of my favorite memories about us together that kind of encapsulates my first year experience is pulling an all-nighter with you to study for a poli-sci midterm, which was our major in university. And I just remember spending the whole night in the basement of your res and like literally walking into that midterm still not knowing anything and really, spoiler alert, like failing. that midterm. But yeah, I think like this is like one of the instances where our poor habits may have like made us closer as friends.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like for first year, like for every single exam that I walked into, I didn't know anything. Like that was a recurring pattern for me. And I just think back to that time when I was like, wow, like how did I even pass first year? Because I felt like those experiences grounded me, you know, like I came into university so confident in my own intellectual ability. And then those experiences of like going into the final, really not knowing anything, really taught me to work harder as a person.
Yeah, I think our first year in general, probably both Yimin and I, really taught us about humility and, like softened our egos a little
Oh my
bit.
God, so much. So much.
Yeah, so I mean, like, I feel like even after first year, we like actually had a lot of the same classes together, right? So we still were pretty tight, and our friend groups almost kind of like ended up being the same people, which is why we really kept in contact.
And we even roomed together in third and fourth year. We lived in the same house. It was such a good time. Honestly, I think back and I reminisce on how good we had it, and how much I had taken it for granted. But those were some really good years, and I feel like we just grew closer and closer as we got to know each other better from first year to now, especially with the pandemic. I remember just when everything was shutting down because of the pandemic, like classes were canceled, and we had this whole week where we were just like, what are we going to do with our life? Like, are we going to go back home? Are we going to stay? And I remember us just walking to McDonald's, just like taking that slow walk for some ice cream. And I just like miss those vibes, you know, like the ability to go somewhere with your friends for food. But yeah, I think like just from that, like we've gotten so much closer during quarantine.
Yeah, and I did call Yimin a gross keener before, but we actually both are really gross keeners. And one of the reasons we really kept in contact during quarantine is that we set up weekly calls for ourselves. And we would like try to do something new and learn something new. I think it was a way for us to kind of forget that the pandemic was happening and to keep us really engaged. So we did things like taking edX courses, to be, a Harvard student for a period of time. And, also doing paint nights, as well as really starting to talk a lot about things that we didn't tell each other before. And it was really interesting because, as we've said, Yumin and I have known each other for 4 5 years, yet during the pandemic we actually opened up to each other more than we did over the past couple of years of even living together.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like it's so easy when you have other things happening in your life, like when we were living together during university, to just talk about what's happening, you know, like talk about your classes, talk about different people, just to like gossip and waste that time away. And then when you only really have yourself and your thoughts during the pandemic, then you actually can get into some deeper conversations and unpack some things. So I felt like our weekly sessions, like, yeah, they were super intellectual, but they were also ways for us to like vent and also like unpack and think about, you know, what we actually want to do with our life. And we wanted to kind of bring those conversations into a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a really good segue because like we've kind of defined our relationship, and now like the question is why, like every other millennial and Gen Z kid you probably know, have we ourselves started a podcast? And really, the TLDR version of that is that Yim and I are both, working or a student during this time, and we both just felt really disengaged as well as unstimulated by our regular lives. Personally, for me, I'm taking classes every day, and so I felt like a Zoom zombie crawling out of bed, plugging into Zoom for like stupid hours, and then like doom scrolling the rest of the day away, and really accomplishing nothing with my time.
Yeah, I completely feel you, Cindy. I felt like on the opposite end of the spectrum for me, like just spending hours on Teams in these meetings, working all the time, especially this year, like I kind of just felt like I was living to work and I was living for work. Like on the weekends, I was just sleeping and recuperating from like the hectic work week that I had. And on Sundays, I would dread or like just think about all the work that I had to do the next day. So it was just like this never ending cycle. And I feel like as much as work can be like a great addition into being like an adult, it can be extremely draining and sometimes unfulfilling, especially if you know you're in a profession that doesn't, like tangibly positively impact the society that you're living in. I think that it's very easy to feel unfulfilled sometimes. And so I felt like a lot of the times, like I wasn't really using that part of my brain that is creative and likes to think of new ideas. So I really felt like that was missing in my life. And I feel like this podcast kind of fills that void.
Yeah, no, I definitely think him and I are very similar in the way that we're, just naturally really loud and opinionated people. And so we're kind of using this podcast as our creative outlet to channel that energy. And hopefully, listeners, you feel the same way or can empathize with our experiences. And I think aside from always joking about starting a podcast and that influencer life, when we actually did get into it, we ran into a couple of hurdles. And strangely enough, I think our name was the hardest thing for us to choose.
Yeah, like I think we went through so many options. It was ridiculous. And we tested some of these options with our friends. And we always got this feedback that it was like too basic or too uptight or, like it was just like not good. But we finally landed on We Hate Small Talk. It was probably one of the last names that we came up with. And we just wanted a name that would encapsulate some of the topics that we would be talking about on the podcast and also be able to tell our listeners what the podcast is about. And essentially, this podcast, like the name says, isn't going to be about just small talk. It's not that we have anything particularly against it. Don't get me wrong. I love to get to know how someone's day is going. But I think that we wanted to dive deeper into topics that really are important for us. And a lot of these topics we've talked to each other about and realized we either had similar opinions or completely opposite opinions. And we thought that they would make good points of discussion that other people can either find a learning point from or just relate to. So we wanted to get into things like adulting and how that's affected us and how we've been dealing with adulting during COVID. We wanted to dive deeper into relationships and friendships and family and growing up, Asian Canadian, as well as just growing up in general and the struggles or trials and tribulations that we've faced as Gen Zers / millennials. And so we're really excited that you guys have decided to click on this first episode, and we have a lot more in store for you.
Yeah, we really can't wait to start this journey with you. And, it's not just always going to be deep and serious. We're going to share a lot of our funny experiences, and we're hoping that, you'll laugh with us as well as, at us, because we'll do that as well. And we're trying to frame this as if you're just listening to two of your close friends talk about some interesting topics. And so feel free to join in on the conversation at our Instagram handle at We Hate Small Talk. We would really love for you to continue on this journey with us.
Thanks for tuning in on this episode, and click on the next one to listen to all the struggles we faced with adulting.